All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to first take a moment to have all four of the speakers introduce themselves, and then as we're doing that, I want to just ask folks to take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat as well, so that we know who's all in the room today and who's joining us. We also set up just a basic guest link to make it easy for folks to join last minute if you didn't register. So if you see yourself showing up as guest day, if you could just take a second to click those three buttons and change your name so we know who is there. We appreciate it. So I'm going to just start. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll ask Leah, Jennifer, and John Paul to introduce themselves as well. So my name is Joe Flaherty. I'm the Executive Director of Power a Clean Future Ohio. And we'll take a moment here to give a little background for folks who don't know much about PCFO. But Leah, do you want to go next?
Sure, Joe. Hello, everyone. My name is Leah D. Hudnall, and I serve as the Director of the Ohio Climate Justice Fund.
Great. Jennifer?
Hi, everybody. Jennifer here, making sure you can hear me with a thumbs up. President and founder of Abundance Leadership Consulting, and I will be leading the equity coaching work.
Great, thanks. And John Paul.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Paul DeVersa, Principal with Unpredictable City, and I'll be leading greenhouse gas inventory work.
Awesome. We have a really great team, and I see folks introducing themselves in the chat, and I appreciate you doing that so we can see who's all able to attend today. And like I said, we're recording the meeting. That way we can share this information out with other folks who weren't able to attend today. And we may have additional meetings going forward, but thanks again for everyone who's able to attend today. As I said at the beginning, my name is Joe Flaherty. I'm the Executive Director of Power Clean Future Ohio. As a quick background on PCFO, for those folks that aren't as familiar with what we're doing, we launched just about a year ago, and the initiative here is pulling together a really diverse group of organizations that are coming at this clean energy work in Ohio from a variety of different perspectives. But all see local work as a really critical piece to this, partnering with community, partnering with local leaders, ensuring that local governments have the resources, that communities have the resources to advocate for themselves, but also addressing some capacity gaps where local government staff may not have the resources or the expertise, or just need some helpful partners in getting this work done. So that's really why this initiative came together, and we've seen incredible progress just over the first year. Obviously, 2020 was quite the year to launch a new initiative, but we've kept our head above water and have had some really great examples of success and exciting work going on with many of the local communities we're working with. So we have 11 communities, a new community, 12th Bexley just joined this past week, so exciting to announce that soon. But we've had 12 PCFO communities join and want to continue to expand and grow this work. And one way to do that is this Equity Coaching for Sustainable Cities program, which we'll get into here in a minute. But now I want to turn it over to a colleague, Leah D. Hudnall, to talk a little about the Ohio Climate Justice Fund.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for including me here, Joe. I'll just start off with reminding you all where you were in the summer of 2020. In the midst of, a pandemic that we thought was going to probably be over in 6 to 8 weeks. And I think the summer was when we all finally realized we were in for a longer ride than usual. And on top of that, we saw social unrest across the country in response to, just kind of an uprising of a willingness to really respond to historical racism that we've experienced for generations. And so after that, and really for a host of other reasons, the concept of community listening and diverse community voice in the climate, environmental, and clean energy sectors started as a concept around how we could really fund organizations and leaders who have historically not been at the table for these conversations. And that concept has blossomed into what we now are calling the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, which will be an opportunity for Black, Brown, and Indigenous and other people of color to apply for small grants in the third and fourth quarter of this year. To host what we call Listen, Lead, Share sessions. And so Listen, Lead, Share is just a name for our community listening model that with now vaccinations being wide across Ohio, we're hoping can have both digital and in-person community listening sessions with Ohioans who want to have a seat at the table on the conversation about clean energy and climate. Often we hear, and many of us in this room do work every single day to protect those who are at a disadvantage when it comes to clean air and other factors beyond their control in their environment. But I would question and also put the question out to you all, when is the last time we actually dedicated space to hearing from those individuals to whom we say we're fighting for? So the Ohio Climate Justice Fund will be awarding $15,000 to $30,000 grants, general operating support and project support to organizations who are led or governed with BIPOC leadership to be the host of these conversations and to join an inaugural cohort of folks across the state of Ohio who are working at the intersection of race, climate, and democracy. This is a concept that has been in the works for about the past 6 to 7 months. Again, that was conceptualized in the summer of 2020 after all that we had seen, and is, proudly seated with funding from the George Gutton Foundation, Energy Foundation, and the Cleveland Foundation. You will see soon public announcement about this fund. Our public and digital home will be within the PCFO website. And so pretty soon you will be able to learn more about the effort. The other piece to this project that is really exciting for all of us who are working on it is that we are a participatory grant making model. So many of you who have gone out for different grants, you submit your project, you submit your ideas to a host of professionals at a foundation, and they make the decision and you get word back. Well, with this opportunity, we have a group of 10 environmental leaders, 9 of which are women who are making the decisions about where this money goes. And that is what we mean by participatory. It is not a group of funders sitting around a table making the decision. It is a group of peer environmental leaders who now, many of them for the first time in their careers, are having a seat at the decision-making table when it comes to philanthropy. So we're really excited about this, and we hope that you'll join in with us as partners and send over any recommendations you have for organizations who fit the criteria of being BIPOC-led or governed, have a trusted ear in your respective communities, and really have the capacity to lead some dynamic conversations in your cities and towns. What we'll be able to do, Joe is going to provide contact information for all of us, and I welcome the opportunity to speak with each of you and talk more about this, talk more about who in your city you think would be perfect for this opportunity, so that when the RFP is launched in about a month, we can directly follow up with that organization and give them the opportunity to apply. So I don't want to take all the steam away from Joe today with the equity coaching program, but we did want to give you an opportunity to learn more about what's on the horizon. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you, Leah. And I know we're very excited to be able to partner together in this work. We see a vision here of doing this work with local governments, doing this work with community leaders, doing this work with community organizations as a really powerful way to build a sustainable movement across Ohio in this clean energy space that really puts our values at the forefront of this work that we're doing. And one piece of that effort is what we're talking about today, which is Equity Coaching for Sustainable Cities program, which is launched this past month. And this came out of a conversation that had been happening since the beginning of last year around how do we help provide resources to cities to have a deep conversation about what does equity look like in my community? How is my government addressing systemic racism? How are we addressing economic disparities in our community? And how are we really serving the most vulnerable communities that call our cities home? And so one of the resources that we've launched here, this Equity Coaching for Sustainable Cities program, serves to provide cities and a chance to engage with an equity coach that will lead a conversation around those very topics, having in-depth discussion about how to best think through tactics, strategies, changes to policies, programs, and processes within the city to address these things. We know that this is not just a check the box step for your city. This is going to be long-term engagement. Every city that participates in this program, we ask that they become a PCFO community. And in that process, you get long-term engagement from us, the resources that we can bring to bear, and that we're walking hand in hand to help evolve and change both internally as a coalition, the work we're doing, and also the work you're doing for your city. So we're all on this journey together and want to make sure that we're in conversation throughout. So I want to make sure we emphasize that as we get going. I'll make sure as we progress here that you all have the right links and can direct you to the documents to apply. I know several of the communities that are on here today have already applied. And I'm glad to see several of you represented, and we've had some introductory conversations, but want to just have this as a first step, and then we'll go from there. So we'll get to next steps and process and all that, but now what I want to do is turn it over to Jennifer Sconiers to talk about the equity coaching portion of this, and then we'll after that we'll go over to John Paul to talk a little about the greenhouse gas inventory portion. So with that, I'll go ahead, and Jennifer, let me know. Should I go ahead and start sharing my screen now?
Yeah, go ahead and share the screen. We'll dig right in. All right, and as he's doing that, this is really just to give you a primer, if you will, on what the equity coaching programming is. It is based off of a model that was done in Connecticut with Sustainability Connecticut. So we took that model that they created and used that as a backdrop for creating PCFO's equity coaching program. Next slide, please. Go on to the next slide. So a bit more about me. I do racial equity work across the country. I'm actually based here in Columbus, Ohio, which has been home to me for 11 and a half years by way of Illinois. Something that I've been doing pre-pandemic was engagement with folks on racial equity in the greater conservation movement for a number of years. And so I'm always excited to do this work here at home in Ohio. And then I'm also on the OEC's board. So I see some OEC members here, the Ohio Environmental Council. So I've been on there for a few years as well, and I really believe in environmental issues. So really excited to be doing this work with you all. Next slide. So in terms of the program goal, when we talk about equity coaching, and we're going to define this in this presentation, we are looking for local government leaders to implement new strategies and tactics to actively address systemic racism and inequities, thereby creating a more sustainable, healthier city and achieving environmental equity. So that's a whole lot of words to say that we actually believe in this work and what it looks like in your cities. And also knowing that each city is going to be in a different place with this work, which I think is why the equity coaching program is so important, which is to really create a design that will support your city in moving this work forward. Next slide, please. So in terms of the goal, this is to support the participants in developing a clear, measurable environmental goals that promote equitable policy actions to reduce harmful emissions and utilize clean energy, also ensuring that community engagement is a part of the policymaking process. So essentially, we're going to go through steps here in several slides of what occurs during equity coaching, but we do want you to leave this experience with something that's concrete and something that's also measurable. So we want to work with you in setting these equity coaching goals. And also we'll go into how many sessions this looks like at the start. We don't pretend that we're going to solve all of your equity issues within the coaching framework, but we do want to give you a platform and a basis with which to create these plans that are sustainable. So that's what we're looking at, look at equity coaching. Next slide, please. So in terms of the coaching outcomes, we have them laid out for you here. We are identifying issues related to systemic racism and environmental inequities, which Joe and Leah pointed out earlier. We review the role local government plays in addressing or perpetuating these issues. We identify equity-driven policies, programs, and practices to address environmental inequities related to lack of access, representation, and resources. And of course, we support goals to engage the public around these issues and implement solutions. So those are the primary outcomes we're looking at with equity coaching. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we define equity, I think it's really important to come into this programming knowing how PCFO defines it, so there's some clarity. So equity means fairness in process, access, and outcomes. Unlike equality, which assumes that every individual will obtain the same benefit from the equal distribution of resources, equity accounts for individual needs. So I think it's really important having a clarity of framework coming in, that this is the lens with which we're going to be doing this equity coaching work. Next slide, please. Equity means we know our neighbors, we value diversity. All members of our community have the ability and opportunity to co-create the vision for our community and shape decisions. We connect with people who are different from us. We strive for genuine collaboration, and decision makers in our community reflect those impacted by the decisions. So again, that's what equity means in this context of equity coaching in this framework. Next slide, please. So in terms of what the coaching is, this is actually what I call a fusion model. For those of you who've received any kind of traditional coaching in the past, this is a combination of coaching, facilitation, some advising, and some mentorship. So this is a very unique and specific model that we've created for this program. So in equity coaching, these are individual guided conversations in which participants learn more about the concept of equity and how it shows up or is absent from their work, all while creating opportunities to grapple with big questions. So coach will provide, on average, 4 60-minute sessions conducted via Zoom. Next slide, please. And in terms of the process, we've laid out what these 4 sessions could look like. The first session is really assessing needs, and that is taking into account any surveying that has occurred prior to starting the program. So many of the PCFO cities complete an assessment reviewing that, but also assessing the needs of your city. Session 2 is equity decision. So this is really having a discussion about what equity looks like in your city and how that can be enacted in real life. Session 3 is the goal setting. So this is actually writing down or putting a pen to paper to what some of these equity coaching goals look like. And then session 4 is the continuation of the goal development and next steps. And then we also have coaching follow-up. So again, 4 hours is the place to start, right? In terms of developing a plan with some concrete goals that can also be measurable. Next slide. So I went through that really, really fast, and I'm sure that you all have questions. So I'd love to take some Q&A. And you can maybe stop sharing so I can see everybody's faces. Any questions from the group about equity coaching, what it is, what it means for your individual city? Curiosities.
Good morning, it's still morning. My name is Andrew from the city of Athens. You mentioned at the end of your presentation, 4 hours as a starting point. In your mind, what does, after that initial step happens, kind of, in an ideal world, what would the next step look like? What would the growth look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is, and I want to also preface that this is an organization that we're piloting, right? So when we take on this first coaching class, we'll have a better sense of, if you say how many coaching hours, if you will, what would it take for a city to achieve its goals? I mean, I think, something that we do in coaching writ large, and I'm working with other conservation groups as an example, is that we start with a framework such as this. And then depending on what those individual needs are, in this case from your city or municipality, we do, as part of the process, is chart out what the goals are. Now, based on the goals that are set, which is, I believe, in session 3, that can give us a sense of time frame in terms of how long it could take to achieve those goals. I think part of this is looking at the follow-up, knowing that the follow-up looks different in every city. We don't want to leave you hanging after 4 sessions and say good luck, right? We want to be able to do some checking in. But I know that each city will look different, right? In terms of the goals are set, the timelines as they are presented or created in your plans. So I think for us, we know that 4 hours is the start. And again, this was also based on the Connecticut model, where they had a 4-hour process. And what I laid out has 4 60-minute sessions, but you could use those 4 hours in the ways that make sense for you, right? So if it means we're doing, and I don't try to make me math here, but say a couple of 90-minute sessions and then use the remaining time for a follow-up, we can do that. But we do want you to have something that's tangible and concrete, right, as a place to start. Does that answer your question? Great. Thank you, Andrew. It's a great question. Other questions?
Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yes. And I see
Hi.
someone else is a guest A too, who's on deck.
Oh.
Hi. Hi, Jeff.
Yes.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Jeff Ortega, City of Columbus. Great to be with you and others here. Just a quick question, if you could elaborate a little bit on the application process, time frame, and any restrictions on the use of dollars, if you could. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, Joe, do you want to speak into that a little bit in terms of the application process and how it stood up so far?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So we have an application that is on our website under the equity coaching session, and I'll, as soon as I finish here, I'll post a link to that so everyone has that. But once you submit your application, and this is something maybe Jennifer, you can speak a little bit to this as well, but our process is that we want to make sure we have a first step of doing intake with you all to have a conversation around how is this program going to serve you, and make sure that we're keeping that in mind as we think about a coach, because that's the next step in this process. We've made a purposeful decision in structuring this program to really live equity and making sure that it's at the forefront of this. So we've prioritized choosing coaches that are members of the community, or as close as we can get. We know that it's not going to work out 100% of the time, but that's our top priority, is to find a coach that is based in the community, understands the unique history, nature, and character of the community. So once we've had your application, we've had an introductory conversation, we'll be going through a process on the back end to match you with a coach. We currently have an RFQ where we're collecting qualifications from a variety of folks out there across the state who are interested in being equity coaches. And so we'll go through that process of matching you with the coach. And then once we've had those introductory meetings, the coach will take it from there to help coordinate the logistics of getting started. So that's the basics. Jennifer, I don't know if you want to add anything to that explanation, or Jeff, if that answered your question, or if I can add any additional clarity.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. I just unmuted myself. That answers my question. I just was wondering what the process looked like from a big picture standpoint. And if there are any, you mentioned $15,000 to $30,000, if there any restrictions as to what that should be used for? Just more curious than anything else. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, and I should clarify, hopefully we didn't confuse too many folks at the beginning. The Ohio Climate Justice Fund is a separate parallel effort here where we're in collaboration with one another. Those grants that Leah mentioned will go specifically to BIPOC-led community organizations in the state. This is a separate entity that will, a separate effort that will focus specifically on municipal staff to serve them with this equity coaching program. Yep.
Great, that answers his question. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add, Joe. I think that was a good primer. Any other questions? I think, is it Caitlin? Oh, I think you're muted, or your volume is really, really low, because unfortunately I can't hear you. I know. Technology foils. Okay, she's gonna call.
Sometimes we have issues with Caitlin's audio, so she'll call in and we can catch up with her.
Great. Caitlin's calling in. Are there other questions?
Jennifer, could I throw one in real quick?
Sure, yeah, Sarah.
Hi. I'm just curious about the process to determine who should be at the table and how a community makes those decisions, and whether at what point in the process people are invited to participate, and how cities determine that invitation list and how far-reaching this goes, and questions around that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thanks for asking that, Sarah. I think part of this is thinking through when it comes to the specific issues that we're talking about as it relates to energy in your city and initiatives, policy initiatives. We're thinking about who are the folks. I think we're looking there's an internal piece in terms of an internal staffing component. Who are those people who are influencing and or deciding that as a place to start with this model? I think on the commute, and if I'm hearing it right, there's a community aspect. If maybe I'm reading too much in the question. I mean, I think that's a place where I know I have some curiosity, right? Because we're looking at a couple things. There's an initial component of what this can look like in terms of any initiatives you have with your city. And then it's about who is impacted. So part of this framework, which gives it some flexibility, is that we can engage in conversations at the staff level. We can also look at what are some greater conversations that we'd have with this framework, right? So, you know, if there needs to be a larger table discussion, what does that look like relative to what the work looks like in your city? And determine what's the best use of energy and time to do that, right? So I think that's going to look different based on the city itself. Joe, I'm curious if you also have some thoughts. You know, there's a lot here, as you can say, a lot of layers to the coaching program. So if you also have some additional thoughts as well on that.
I would just maybe from a resource perspective, from our funding, we have enough to do 10 pilot cities to do this work, and so that also is a little bit restricted in the sense that we're focusing this on city staff. But if the ultimate outcome of those conversations is, you know, really the community conversation and this work needs to happen, we've tried to set up some flexibility so that we can continue to have that discussion, and potentially the city could directly engage with the coach to further the work or take it to that next step.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think I get a view of it. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to Caitlin. Are you able to?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you.
Thank you. So Caitlin Milius, City of Lakewood. I noticed on the application that, I guess 2 questions. One, that it said there was a maximum of 8 people. If you could just elaborate on that a little bit more. And then just so I understand, you talked about kind of the individual coaching sessions versus the 4 60-minute sessions. Is there an individual element to this?
No, so yeah, I was just giving an example of some things I do in other spaces. So in this particular coaching model, it's 4 hours total. So it's 4 1-hour sessions. So that would be who's in the group. Joe, do you want to speak to the number itself of the 8?
You know, that number is just kind of an estimate where we're trying to provide a framework of, and working with Jennifer on kind of thinking how we structure this. If it gets, and Jennifer, you might be able to speak to this from the facilitation model, but if it gets larger than that, it changes kind of the context of that discussion and looks a little different, more like a training versus an equity and coaching session. So that's what that looks like. But if once again, we're trying to build in flexibility since this is a brand new program. So if in a conversation with the city, if there's a real need here to have a facilitated training or discussion with a broader group, we can talk through what that might look like in our first intake meeting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the framework was based on what it would take to actually coach, like in a small group coaching model, what would it take to coach a small group of people, and also appreciating that if your university has a different set of needs, like what would that look like, right? So that's why we're learning too, and also want to build in some flexibility as we work with your cities. I'm seeing something in the chat. You're welcome. This is from Kristen. Sorry it's late. And if you answered this, do you anticipate those who are selected being a cohort and working, interacting with one another to support, learn from each other? Yes. That's the short answer to the question. Yeah, I mean, I do think we envision these as being coaching cohorts, that there is an element of peer learning that happens, and also, frankly, just to move the work forward, right? Like the coach is there as a guide, but we also want you to be able to work together. So yes, I think looking at it as a cohort model is a good way of looking at it.
So I guess I'm thinking of the 10, if you're choosing 10 cities, do you,
the cities.
those 10 cities, do you anticipate kind of serving as a cohort? Obviously, our group within the city would work together.
Right. That's a really great question. I'll start answering it. And Joe, if you have some additional thoughts. So I think, I've been looking at this in terms of like, lack of a term, coaching classes, if you will, like where are the groupings of people as we pilot? What does that look like? What could communication look like across those initial cities? So yeah, I think more globally, we could look at it as a coaching cohort. I know that we'll be learning from the cities, but there can be real value in cities also learning from each other, especially as an inaugural class. So I do think that there could be valuable in viewing this first grouping as a way. And then as we continue to scale the program, really thinking through what that scaling looks like. So there could be a version of equity coaching classes. Great question. Joe, did you have, those are my thoughts, but did you have any thoughts about that?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Great. All right. Any other questions? I know we've got another speaker, so I don't want to suck up too much time. These are great questions. If you have any additional questions for us, you can send a note to Joe, who can also be in contact with me, and we can definitely get those questions answered.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. And what we're going to do now is transition to the other portion of this program, which one of the conversations we've had with cities over the past year is, there's a strong interest. There seems to be a lot of political will and excitement within the community to do this work and to, set a greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal, to do sustainability planning and those kind of things. But oftentimes they're missing some of these key technical pieces, like a greenhouse gas inventory was one really great example that was brought to our attention. And so in structuring this program, we decided to make that as kind of one unique benefit that cities can obtain. We understand that some cities have already done some of this work and maybe already have a greenhouse gas inventory. But through this, we can also potentially dig a little deeper into what you already have. If you already have that information, provides you some recommendations as a follow-up to those types of things. But for those cities that don't have it, this is an opportunity to get yourself a greenhouse gas inventory, the baseline your emissions, to understand where to prioritize this work, but also to do it in this context of ensuring that equity is centered in the policies that you're thinking about, but also centered in the process that you're going through as well. And so having these simultaneous conversations, we think, is really beneficial to ensuring that we're building an equitable movement here towards clean energy as well. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to John Paul. And I'll go ahead and, John Paul, if you want, I can go ahead and start sharing the screen again.
That'd be great, thanks. All right, hello everyone. For those of you that have yet to meet, my name is John Paul DeVersa, and granted, I know some of you are familiar with me, but just to get everyone on the same page, I got my start in the energy and emissions planning field over a decade ago now at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. There I conducted the state's annual emissions inventory and forecast, led the state energy plan, and created their state level goals around climate change. For the last 4 years, I've been with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, helping to build capacity for energy and emissions planning for 80 local governments. And now through Unpredictable City, we're expanding that reach across Ohio with Power Clean Future Ohio. Next slide, please. All right. So a little bit about the company. We believe that deep down, everyone would like to leave the world a better place, and that concept of being a good ancestor, right? But to do this, we're going to have to take an honest look at our built environment, our policies, and the ways we approach the issues that we face. We're going to have to be open to change, but perhaps just as important, we'll need the ability to change. And so we focus on developing capacity at the intersections between our built and social environments. We take a look at the tough questions, offering unbiased information and potential solutions to some of the most persistent issues. And we've had the great opportunity to work on projects from Ohio to Senegal to Nicaragua and elsewhere, helping to develop just and context-specific solutions. Next slide, please. So the success and the struggles of our communities and those of our future generations are inherently tied to the decisions we make today. Whether we're trying to address pollution, energy burden, or climate change, the capacity to make sound energy decisions for our communities is paramount. I started the energy department at Unpredictable City because I truly believe that every city should have dedicated energy planning expertise on their staff. We're starting to see more and more cities realize this, and we're providing those services to assist cities as they internalize energy planning into their operations. Next slide, please. All right, so my guess is that if you're here today, you probably at least have a general idea of what a greenhouse gas inventory is. At its simplest, it's just an accounting of the emissions that accelerate climate change. But its importance is in how an inventory can illuminate the ways our systems interact with each other. For example, in 2020, we'll see emissions in the transportation and commercial sectors go down, while emissions in the residential sector will rise. And this is, of course, because so many of us work from home, minimize shopping outside of the home, and had travel restrictions in place. A greenhouse gas inventory is one way for us to see the impacts of how everything is interconnected. And when we start to overlay these data with equity and justice metrics, we start to uncover ways that we can really have an impact on the well-being of our communities. So the inventory is a place to start, a point from which we'll measure future change. It's also meant to support the actions we take, policy changes, and the programs we develop to make our cities better places. The new administration at the federal level is responding to this. And if you're familiar with the Transportation Infrastructure Granting Program, INFRA, for the first time this year, that money can be spent on electric vehicle charging and alternative fueling infrastructure, but only if those projects are part of a larger climate planning initiative. We'll continue to see more and more federal funding tied to this, and the inventory in this program can be the starting point for those activities. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to start with an inventory so that you can have a baseline of emissions for your cities, providing you with a general order of magnitude of the impacts so that you can make those policy decisions. And again, the inventory is meant to be a starting point. After that, we'll conduct an analysis to provide you with recommended actions. And this may be different for all of you, as you likely have different priorities and areas where you can influence outcomes. We'll take a look at the future impacts and costs of different actions. And now I suggest focusing on 2035 and 2050 as we look into the future, as these align with other activities occurring in the larger market, but we can align that to your needs. And we hope you dig into this information and have questions. So we've built in support and training opportunities to make sure this is just the beginning. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so that first step, the baseline. Developing the baseline will take about 4 weeks, and we've designed the process to require as little from you as possible. We'll start with a kickoff meeting with you, PCFO, and us, where we dive a little deeper into the inventory, what to expect, and where to go next. After that, I'll handle all of the data collection and development, as well as the analysis. And once I've produced the inventory and double and triple checked to make sure that everything makes sense, we'll send it to you and address any questions that you may have. As I mentioned before, we hope that you integrate these analyses into your operations in the future. So for this program, we decided to use the CURB tool designed by C40 cities due to its simplicity and its ability to estimate data when they're difficult to find. You may be familiar with other tools such as ClearPath or Cirrus, and these are both great tools for emissions inventories when you have all of the needed data. But when you're just getting started, that data collection tends to be difficult. So if you want to get running as quickly as possible and as cost effectively as possible, CURB is really the right tool. As well, with the greenhouse gas inventories, we'll likely take a cohort approach to the work. And by working in tandem with other cities, you're more likely to uncover solutions and those economies of scale that otherwise might not present themselves. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the fun part. Once you're good with the baseline, we'll run another analysis to see what are your opportunities for making your city a better place. We'll look at costs, emissions impacts, which priorities these actions might align with, such as equity or efficiency or affordability. And after about 2 weeks, we'll send you the final report and review the opportunities that are uncovered in it. And so we can take a look at up to 3 target years in the future. Again, I suggest 2035 and 2050, at least as 2 of them. But we can certainly incorporate any target years if you have existing goals, such as 2030 and 2040 that I know some of you have. And the reason I chose 2035 and 2050, most automakers are saying they'll have full lines of electric vehicles in about 15 years. And as well, in 2050, most electricity generation in the US will be from renewable sources. So that's a major sea change. Next slide, please. All right. And well, this information means nothing if you don't understand it, right? So if you have a question about the report at any point, whether it's a month down the line or a year, just reach out to me. I love talking about this stuff and we truly want to see this translate into action. Secondly, we also want you to integrate this work into your operations. And so for those of you that would like hands-on training for your staff, we've agreed to provide that at a reduced rate for anyone who has us develop their baseline for them. And I want to be perfectly honest, I don't necessarily think that you need us to train you on how to use Curve. The online resources should be sufficient for anyone familiar with Excel and city data. However, if you're looking to integrate those different data sources, for instance, to create a CDP compliant inventory, you'll definitely want someone familiar with the data to guide that process. And finally, ideally, you'll see your recommendations and say, let's get to work, right? But chances are justifying those funds to start the work may be a barrier, especially as we're all expecting a slow road out of the pandemic, or perhaps building the political will might be difficult as well. So if you'd like to get the ball rolling, but are hesitant to commit significant funds that may be required to get this project started, we've agreed to provide any of the Energy Department services to you again at a reduced hourly rate. This way you can test the waters or jump right in, whichever works best for you. And of course, you're under no obligation to undertake any of this, but the goal is to get you to see the value in emissions planning and translate that into action. And we want you to know there's help along the way. Next slide, please. All right, so again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions about this program or any of our other work. I love to hear how cities are approaching equity and climate change, and I'm always happy to help where I can. And so with that, I think we'll take questions.
And maybe before we go into questions for John Paul, I just want to take a moment here to kind of review everything to make sure we all understand kind of what the process would look like. So if what you're hearing today is, for those of you who have already applied, you've already got step 1 underway and check that off the list. For those of you that are interested in applying, here's what this would look like. You fill out our application on our website. Once we've had the opportunity to review those things, we'll be reaching out, especially those of you that already have applied, to set up a first intake meeting focused on equity coaching. This will be with Jennifer and our team to talk through what this program is what needs it's going to serve you all, and how best to approach this as we think about matching you with a coach. Once we've kind of had that meeting and decided a path forward, we'll also go through the process of setting up that introductory intake meeting with Unpredictable City to make sure that you all are prepared to move forward with the greenhouse gas inventory as well. Then it is on us to make sure we get you matched with a coach that serves those needs and the information that we heard from you in that step 2. And then once that step is done, we'll go ahead and begin the program where you have the chance to have your first coaching session start. So that's a quick rundown of things. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen here and pause for any questions that you have specific to John Paul and the work that he went over, or if you have broader questions on the program.
John Paul, I have a question for you. When we're looking at our greenhouse gas emissions, are we doing scope 1, 2, and 3? Or are we just looking predominantly at scope 1 and 2? I know that's really also depend on the data that's available for each city too. So
yeah, so it's going to depend a bit on the data that's available. Certainly 1 and 2, as we get into scope 3, if we're making a lot of estimations, the reliability of the data for scope 3 becomes difficult. And so we can certainly take a look at it.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Is there any way we could describe for folks scope 1, 2, and 3, just for context?
Sure. What I would like to do is actually get you the real definition. So if we want to take another question, I will pull those up real quickly.
While John Paul's doing that, any other questions specific to what he discussed or for the broader program?
Yes, I'll ask a question regarding the energy data for a city. Are we looking at the most recent calendar year, or how far historically might we look to get trends? Or and then furthermore, once we have sort of a baseline data set and analysis, are we going to learn how to continue to track GHG data going forward after that with the tools that we're using?
Sure. So, hi, Sarah.
Hi.
And just so everyone knows, I threw the definitions up online. They can get a little tricky, so I wanted to make sure you had the exact ones, at least from EPA. So as far as which year we want to start with, it really makes sense to kind of start with the closest year, which would be 2020. Of course, 2020 is an odd year, and so it may not necessarily give the most accurate picture of what's typically occurring in your communities. So we can look back as far as you want to go, especially if you want to align with, say, some other goals in that sense. And yes, as we're looking forward, my hope is that you will take the inventory and the workbook, and that you will use it to continue this work in the future years.
Yeah, in the city of Athens, we have an Environment and Sustainability Commission, and on that commission, we track 6 metrics across the city. It is my job to track our energy use and show trends for reduction, and that has been a very difficult task to do well and consistently, and really, in time too, because it's kind of a volunteer position. So I'm excited about this because it'll set, a standard and give me a real methodology. And then if I'm no longer on the commission next year, someone else can pick it up and take it on. So I'm excited about that. I think that's a great addition to our community.
That's great to hear, Sarah. Yeah, that continuity piece is that's the important thing. It's it's great if you do it once, but if it doesn't keep going. Yeah. So.
I also just had a general question, because I know that you're only taking, like you said, you had 10 cities, right, that can enroll in the program. So is this like a fairly competitive, or do you, I guess, are you just does everyone that apply gets in, or is it one of these things that it's like based on the need of the city? How is that all determined?
So right now, we as we put out the application, we're also uncertain of the level of excitement and what this would look like. I will say, just within the first few weeks here of it being available, we've had several applications. Our expectation is, we want any community that's already joined PCFO will certainly be prioritized to make sure that they can get started on this work. We also hope to expand it. I think that if we can find success, we're hoping to continue this program and go beyond that. So any city that applies, I think we're going to continue to have this conversation, even if they're not included in that first 10. We want to keep them in discussion. So I'm hopeful that we can serve every city that applies, but if we end up getting 30 cities over the next few weeks, we'll have to certainly be tracking down, see if we can apply for some more funding or find opportunities to get them involved. So. Any other questions for John Paul, Jennifer, Leah, or myself? Great. Well, I'm going to post in the chat here a link that hopefully you all have seen at this point. Like I said, I know several of you have already applied, but that goes to our Equity Coaching for Sustainable Cities program website, subpage on our PCFO website. On that page, you can see a few different links. One is just a PDF that gives you a broad overview of the program and to learn more about the program button. There's also the Apply Here button, which takes you to the page for cities to apply. And then there's the View RFQ button that takes you to the RFQ for coaches. And on that point, I want to make sure that we specifically mention this to you all, which is that we want to make sure that if you have someone in mind that could be a great coach, that is a good community member who's been engaged with the city on some of these issues that you think would be a good fit, we want to make sure you have the chance to share that. So please feel free to share that name with us. There's a question within the application. I think it's the last question on the application that asks for those ideas. So that's what we're looking for. If there's a specific community member that you have in mind that might be a good fit for this, please let us know. We welcome those ideas and would love to have a conversation with them. So that's what that will look like going forward. We're looking forward to having more conversations with you all. For those of you that have applied, look for outreach from us soon to set up that first introductory meeting. And if you haven't applied yet and you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to have additional meetings or follow-up meetings with you all to dig deeper on any of these issues. So with that, I'll pause for a moment to see if any of the other speakers, Leah, Jennifer, or John Paul, have any closing thoughts before we wrap up.
Ms. Jennifer, just really excited to start this process. What we're doing, I think, is really important, also very complex. So, excited to really dig into it. I think there's a powerful and positive impact we can have.
Thanks, Joe, for the opportunity for closing remarks. I agree wholeheartedly with Jennifer that this is a very exciting partnership that we're looking to launch. And I know for the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, we are excited to be able to work with city leaders and really understand what is going on the ground and also in your arena in City Hall. And so we want to be able to merge those conversations for the better good. So we're excited.
And just to add to that, I think that, with the level of support that we're seeing from the community for this type of work, and all the way top down from the Fed as well, I think right now is really just a great time to try and move the needle on some of the things that we've thought about and that we've worked on, but perhaps struggled with a little bit over the past few years.
Great. Thank you, John Paul, Leah, and Jennifer. I'm posting into the chat here my email address as well as Leah's email address. If you have questions on either of the programs, the Power Clean Future Ohio or the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, please reach out directly to us. I can also share direct contact information for Jennifer or John Paul. I know they'd be happy to answer any questions or do any follow-up as well. So thank you again for everyone who was able to join today. If any of your colleagues would like to view this webinar, we have a recording that we can share out. So please feel free to reach out and we can share that with you to pass along. So thank you again and looking forward to working together. Hope you all have a good day.